What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to Unit 6.5. This is Part D. This is Reform and Reaction on Russia. You already know 1750 to 1900, and you know what Reform and Reaction is at this point because you watched 3 other videos on 3 different places. So let's get into this and what's going on. We got a little contextualization, 1450, mid-ish 1800s. Essentially, in the previous time period and half of this time period that we're talking about, Russia had ended Mongol rule. If you remember those guys from so long ago, they're always the exception to the rule. The Mongols get kicked out in the mid-1400s from Russia, and Russia is going to consolidate under one prince, and they're essentially what's going to become known as the Romanov dynasty, and they are going to become a gunpowder empire looking to expand. They are looking to expand because they are seeking warm water ports, because they want to try and eventually get themselves involved in this age of exploration that the West or the Western Europeans are getting into. They do centralize their government when they expand. They have a czar who is a absolute ruler or absolute monarch, and they are behind Western Europe. While Western Europe is colonizing the Americas, Russia's really just a land-based empire. They are not able to colonize quickly enough and to get their naval ships in order and get these warm water ports to expand, so they're behind. And kind of the theme here is they are behind. So in 1750, while Britain is going through the Industrial Revolution, guess what Russia is? They are behind. So one of the problems that they're going to face in the mid-1800s is they are unindustrialized. If you're not seeing this as a theme yet, I really don't know what to tell you. There are these 4 empires and they're not industrialized and they need to reform in order to industrialize, and that's what we're looking at. The other issue they have is they have an old school system. It's the mid-1800s, and they're still in kind of feudal times. And if you look at Western Europe, they emerged out of that feudal period in like the 11 and 1200s, and it's the mid-1800s in Russia, and we still have this feudalism and serfdom. There is still a large percentage in Russia of people who are serfs in the mid-1800s, and which means that there's very little middle class. These are in Western Europe, in Britain and France and Germany, the middle class are the investors. They're the people who invest in these factories to allow the Industrial Revolution to grow. And they're missing that in Russia as a result of this serfdom and like a lot of agricultural-based economy. Also, they are an absolute monarchy still in the mid-1800s. While Western Europe has gone through this Enlightenment period, and most of the monarch's power in Europe has been limited at least a little bit with some democratic ideas, we don't have that in Russia. Russia is like still in the 1450s at this point. The other issue that they face, and is they really face an embarrassing loss. They lose this piece of land right here called Crimea, and they lose it against the Ottomans. And if you remember from 6.5b, the Ottomans are the sick man of Europe. Like, you should not be losing to the Ottomans, and Russia does. And it's kind of like this doubly embarrassing. It's like, man, we just lost the sick man of Europe. Like, bro, we're pretty weak. So it's really embarrassing, and it kind of brings to the attention to the Tsar at the time, like, we got to do something like now, otherwise we're in big trouble. So they are going to reform. There is no fancy name for this reform, unlike in Japan and Russia, or Japan and China and the Ottomans who have their little fancy name. There's no one name for this. There's just a couple things that they are going to attempt to do. One, in 1861, the Tsar emancipates the serfs. So serfdom ends and the serfs are freed in 1861. And the goal was from the Tsar is that these serfs who become freed will move to cities and start working in factories, so we have that population taken care of to industrialize. The problem is that in order to keep the nobles happy, because the nobles don't want to lose their serfs, the Tsar says that the serfs have to buy land from their noble in order to be freed. So they basically have to pay for their freedom. And the serfs are all pretty poor, so they can't afford their freedom. And the prices of freedom could be set by the nobles, so there's a whole big issue. So basically, we emancipate the serfs, and they're supposed to get freed, but none of them can buy their freedom, so they're all pretty much still in this state of bondage, essentially. Number 2 is some Enlightenment ideas are allowed to enter into Russia, and some of the czars are going to promote Enlightenment ideas, but essentially, similar to what we saw in the Ottoman Empire, they're going to be canceled. So a lot of the trial by jury and less censorship is going to be allowed temporarily under one czar, and then the next czar cancels it out, which leads to people getting a taste of this freedom and the taste of the end of absolute monarchy, and they like it, but they're going to, when they cancel it, it's going to lead to more kind of rebellion, essentially. Lastly, as we're going to see, and this is kind of the key to a lot of this, similar to Japan, and Japan and Russia get compared a lot this way, they both have state-sponsored industrialization. Because we don't have that middle-class investing or investors who can pump money into building these factories and then to make money off the factories. The government instead pumps the money in themselves in order to build these factories. So it's state, meaning the country, sponsored industrialization. So the government is going to build these factories. They're also going to build a trans meaning across, if you forget Trans-Saharan. Trans means across, so we have the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which is going to go all the way across Russia, connecting the eastern half of Russia all the way across into Europe, which is a huge deal. It's going to link the iron industry and the coal industry with urban centers, a 5,000-mile track, which is like East Coast, West Coast of the United States, and almost back again, which is nice. However, there's going to be problems with this, if you can't tell already. Number one, the nobles and the peasants really oppose industrialization. It doesn't work because the peasants are serfs and they can't be in the factories, and they don't really want to work in factories. That's not their livelihood. That's not what they're used to. They don't want to be in a city. They like their rural countryside. And the nobles don't like it because it's going to take away from their power, because they're going to lose their peasant labor force. Also, the peasants who do move to the factories, or who do move to the cities, which is only about 3% of the population, which is very, very small for an industrialized or attempting to industrialize country. This 3% of the population who move find themselves with kind of this old school British industrial system. Long hours, poor conditions, no safety standards, really a horrendous and not ideal life. And they are not going to like and encourage others to do what they're doing because it's not ideal for them. And it's a really small percentage. The government doesn't solve these problems. Unlike what we saw in Western Europe, where there's reforms passed and elections are allowed to happen, and we're going to encourage more people to vote in democracy. This is an absolute monarchy, and they're not going to care what the people think. They don't care about the long hours. They don't care about the poor conditions. They don't care that the nobles are upset, and they don't care that the peasants are upset. And since the government doesn't solve these problems, some people, especially this small percentage of workers and other people who are upset at what's going on in their country, are going to turn to Marxism/communism in their country. And they are going to turn to this idea from Western Europe, which is communism, which didn't take off in Western Europe. Remember, if you forgot about this again, it's because in Western Europe, they're going to pass reforms. So instead of turning to communism and revolution and overthrowing the government, people are going to say, we got our little piece, we're good. In Russia, they don't get that. So instead of having these reforms, they're going to turn to communism. And the main communist group, which is going to rise by the end of the 1800s, is a group called the Bolsheviks, led by this guy, Vladimir Lenin. And this is their symbol. It's the hammer for workers and the sickle for farmers. And they're going to try and unite these people to overthrow the government and set up a society where everyone's equal. I don't want to give away the story, and we're going to get to this in future units. I'm just kind of setting you up for this, but this group is going to take over in 1917, and they are going to form a communist country in Russia called the Soviet Union. But that's another story for another day. But this is kind of like the groundwork for it. So that's all I got. As always, you got any questions, you write it down, you let me know. I'm out.